So today is Saturday, March 4th, and we'll continue in going forward with the Bodhisattvas and Zen. We began this series with Are Bodhisattvas Really Real? We looked at Manjushri Bodhisattva, who's traditionally the great patron of Zendo and of realization practice. And a vast emptiness, wisdom itself. Now, today we'll look at the Bodhisattva of great compassion, Avalokiteshvara, in Sanskrit, Kannon, Japanese, Kuan Yin, in Chinese. These are the two great guiding bodhisattvas of Zen practice, Manjushri, Bodhisattva of wisdom, and Kannon, Bodhisattva of great compassion. So, three archetypal images taken together sum up Zen practice. The first, of course, would be the Buddha seated beneath the Bodhi tree, touching the earth. After entering the Zendo and bowing to the Buddha, we walk to our place, our mat or chair. We bow to it, then turn and bow to the Sangha. Like the Buddha 2,500 years ago, we are honoring our place under the Bodhi tree, where we will do our work of awakening. Then in gratitude, we bow to our fellow practitioners. For unlike the Buddha, we do not do this work alone. Thanks to him, we have the fellowship of Sangha. Second would be Manjushri, Bodhisattva of wisdom, archetype of the actual work of ongoing practice realization. And not only that, Manju, or Manjushri, simultaneously embodies the absolute purity of prajna, non-dual wisdom, that which is always truly is. Not just what we work to get, but what is right now. When we count this breath, experience this breath, raise the central point of the koan, inquire deeply into who is hearing, then Manjushri swings her sword, rides his lion. The heart of perfect wisdom beats with renewed life, and the lotus blooms. His sword that kills is the sword that gives life. When the untrue world is gone, the true one appears. Avalokiteshvara, Kuan Yin, Kannon, Kanjizai are all various names. Bodhisattva of compassion is our third archetype. Though Samantabhadra or Fugen, a bodhisattva of compassionate action riding an elephant, is often paired in Zen with Manjushri on a lion. In Zen's movement west, Kannon, bodhisattva of compassion, has become more central. Perhaps we gravitate toward brand names or are simply not into learning the minutiae of religious forms. North Americans tend to be pretty direct. Then again, Zen master Hakuin in 18th century Japan painted lots of images of Kannon and only very few, if any, of Samantabhadra. The Lotus Sutra's 25th chapter, which is chanted regularly in Zen monasteries, is dedicated to the saving power of Avalokiteshvara, Bodhisattva of compassion, who is shown as able to free devotees from every imaginable suffering and disaster, fire, flood, famine, beasts, torture, prisons, droughts, swords, shipwreck, you name it. Kannon has it covered, and then some. Supposedly, too, not long before his death, Zen master Dogen walked in Kinhin. Kinhin literally means sutra walking, walking with attention while focusing on the practice, reciting this 25th chapter of the Lotus Sutra aloud. Iconographically, Kannon appears in a variety of forms. She may be seated beneath the branches of a willow beside a stream or river, or she may hold a vase of healing balm. When the vase is upright, her healing power is held in readiness. When the vase is upended, she releases compassionate power into the world. She can also appear as a fisherman's wife. Sometimes Avalokiteshvara is a man, standing or sitting, excuse me, beside the Buddha or a Buddha. China's Dunhuang carved and painted cave temples as well as the Lungmen cave grottos and others, offer many such images of Avalokiteshvara. The Great Hall of Sanjusan Gendo in Kyoto has 1,000 life-size gilded kanons, each with a totally individual face. And in the center of this immense grouping sits, not stands, sits a 1,000-armed, 12-foot high seated Kannon. By the way, the little carved 1,000-armed wooden Avalokiteshvara or Kannon or Kuan Yin that we have in the Zendo looks very much like the gigantic central figure in the Hall of 1,001 Buddhas or 1,001 Kanons at Sanjusan Gendo in Kyoto. Of all the Bodhisattva's various forms, thank you. Of all the Bodhisattva's various forms, the 1,000-armed one is considered the most sacred. The 1,000-armed Kannon is known as Senju Kannon, and she or he stands, mostly in Tibetan forms, or sits in China and Japan, with 11 heads topped with a Buddha head, looking in all directions, and 1,000 arms, each with an open eye in the palm, holding implements that can be used to help, to heal, or to put a stop to rampant egotism. So the 1,000-armed Avalokiteshvara holds ropes, tridents, staffs, bows, arrows, spears, medicines, bells, teacups, swords, lotuses, rosaries, flowers, pens, pencils, cushions, bowls, shovels, rakes. It is a dynamic image of active compassion, compassion bursting skillfully forth while at the same time remaining centered and at peace. This wonderfully dramatic visual cipher of some genius reveals what selfless, skillful, wise compassion actually feels like, and simultaneously demonstrates both our future potential as such a bodhisattva and our actual nature right now, something that is true for each of us, a real nature for all. In 2006, when our group of Zen pilgrims to China visited Linji's, it's Rinzai's, monastery, I was surprised to find a huge, maybe 30 feet high, 1,000-armed Avalokiteshvara painted red, blue, green, gold, almost Tibetan looking, standing behind where Linji would give his take no prisoner teishos. We were told that the image was an actual reproduction of the original that had been destroyed during the Cultural Revolution. It was an exact copy, supposedly. It vividly revealed what no books had ever shown, that Linji's ferocious style, his fierce Zen, was itself the expression of the deepest, most selfless compassion. Come on, he was saying, this is your truth as it is mine, as it is everyone's. You can do it, don't dawdle. Compassion may not always be sweet. Sometimes an emphatic no can be the kindest thing of all. Compassion is not sentiment or empathy, but skillful action. When we get out of the way, we know what to do. So compassion is wisdom, wisdom, compassion. However, simply imitating an idea of unsweet compassion is a kind of self-centered delusion that can be disastrous. According to the Shurangama Sutra, the Bodhisattva Avalokiteshvara was a man in the Buddhist Sangha who, by dedicating himself to the practice of attention to hearing, was fully enlightened. When I was practicing with Aitken Roshi, he told me that if you want to understand the essence of Buddhism, it lies in this inquiry. who is hearing. This is Avalokiteshvara practice. Avalokiteshvara, hearer of the cries of the world, becomes the female Kuan Yin in China, Kannon in Japan, and also Kanjizai, the Lord who observes all. He is the male Chenrezig in Tibet and also the source of Tara, the Savioress, who emerged from a tear that dropped from the eye of the Bodhisattva when he looked at the sorrows of our world. She is compassion's most refined, concentrated, and feminine essence. And there are times when the world's sorrows may stun us. There are times when we come face to face with our own pettiness and shortcomings. At such times, we can even convince ourselves that Zen is too demanding a path, too difficult for the likes of us. Take heart, we are not alone. Here's something from the Denkoroku, record of transmitting the light from 13th century Japan. It's a quote from Keizan Joken, who put together the Denkoroku, transmission case number 3. You may think the way of the Buddha patriarchs distinguishes individuals and capacities. We are not up to it. Who among the ancients was not a body born of a mother and father? Who did not have feelings of love and affection or thoughts of fame and fortune? However, once they practiced thoroughly, thereby achieving enlightenment. You may think the way of the Buddha patriarchs distinguishes individuals and capacities. We're not up to it. Who among the ancients was not a body born of a mother and father? Who did not have feelings of love and affection or thoughts of fame and fortune? However, once they practiced thoroughly, thereby achieving enlightenment. Roshi Kapleau used to say, no sincere effort is ever wasted. If you don't let the Dharma down, the Dharma will never let you down. How do we know but that in trying and failing, we are not setting in motion the very things we need to help us accomplish our goals? As a teenager, I spent a lot of time shooting at targets with a bow and arrow. In time, I realized that my many misses were so many steps towards hitting the bullseye. In trying and failing and trying again lies a way of maturing. So too, over time, embarrassment about failing in Zen practice, about not being smart or strong or successful enough, gets stripped away. We no longer think of it as failing, but learn instead to work sincerely, forgetting consequences, forgetting ourselves, simply doing our best regardless of how it unfolds, which is itself worth a great deal to actually begin to live like that. Zen practice won't give way to us because of our looks or our eloquence or our smarts. It's an iron mountain, or as Western fairy tales might have it, a glass hill. We try, we fail, we try again. Through trying, failing, getting back up, and trying again, our Zen practice becomes genuine, and we ourselves authentic. That is authentically ourselves. Avalokiteshvara Bodhisattva's own great vow actually matured through heartfelt, bitter failure, which I find rather hopeful. Here's the essence of that legend. This is from an earlier book of mine, the Hungry Tigress, completely revised and expanded edition from Yellow Moon Press back in 1999. The Bodhisattva of Avalokiteshvara, Bodhisattva of compassion, hearer of the cries of the world, looked down into the hells and saw them filled with suffering beings. I will liberate all the beings in the lower realms, he vowed. Through countless ages he labored, descending into hell after hell, emptying hell after hell. After eons of heroic exertion, the Bodhisattva stood up and wiped the diamonds of sweat from his brow. He looked down into the now empty, silent hells and smiled. It was done. All living things had been freed. Here and there a curling wisp of smoke rose. Now and then in some vast cavern below, faint echoes sounded as a loose brick toppled from a pile of rubble. But the raging fires had been quenched, and the great iron cauldrons of boiling blood were quiet. Sweet silence flowed through the dark halls. Even the raging demons were gone, the horse-headed, the tiger-headed, the horned and fanged ones. They, too, in the end, had been released by the mighty efforts of the Compassionate One. Suddenly, there came a wailing scream, and then another. Flames leapt, smoke whirled, blood-filled cauldrons once again bubbled madly. Whips cracked, chains clanged, demons roared. The radiant smile faded from the Bodhisattva's face. In less than an instant, all was exactly as before. The hells were again completely filled. The heart of the Bodhisattva of Avalokiteshvara filled with sorrow. His head broke into 11 heads. His arms shattered into 1,000 arms, with an open eye of wisdom in each palm. With his 11 heads, the Bodhisattva could now look in every direction to see the sufferings of every being. With 1,000 wisdom-guided arms, he could now reach into any realm to save those in need. Rolling up his 1,000 sleeves, the Bodhisattva again got to work. To gain insight quickly is not necessarily good. To take a longish time is not necessarily bad. Sometimes what is quickly won is never deeply felt. Quick successes may fade without developing the inner strength that persistence brings. When Britain stood alone against the rising Nazi tide, Winston Churchill stood in Parliament and announced, "Success is not final. Failure is not fatal. It is the courage to continue that counts." It is the courage to continue that counts. What is courage but compassion in action? Persist, and you may find 1,000 hands are already your own. So, to continue on with this as background, let us look at case number 89 of the Blue Cliff Record, the hands and eyes of the Bodhisattva of great compassion. In the koan, two important teachers are exploring the nature of Bodhisattva of Avalokiteshvara and are tossing the Dharma ball back and forth. As a side note, the Hekikanroku, or Blue Cliff Record, was composed about the year originally 950 by Zendo. This is before it was the Blue Cliff Record. He gathered 100 koan cases and wrote really insightful poems for each. Then about 60 years later, Wan Wu, it would be Engo in Japanese, it added to this introductions and comments on both the cases and the verses of Zhendo's, creating the final form we know as the Blue Cliff Record. And it's the book of koans we work on after completing our work on the Mumen Koan, or Gateless Gate, or a Wumen Koan in Chinese. So here's the case. Yun Yen, in Japanese that would be Ungan, asked Dao Wu, who in Japanese would be Dogo, how does the Bodhisattva of great compassion use all those many hands and eyes. Dawu answered, it's like a man in the middle of the night reaching or groping behind his head for his pillow. Jnan said, I understand. Dawu said, how do you understand it? Jnan said, the whole body is hand and eye. Dawu said, that is very well expressed, but it is only 8/10 of the answer. Jnan said, how would you say it, elder brother? Dawu said, throughout the body are hands and eyes. How does the great Bodhisattva of compassion use all those hands and eyes? How many places can you interact with, and how many activities engage in at one time? Isn't Zen about being present for this cloud, this person, this ring of the phone? How could multitasking be Zen? What's going on? Compassionate activity is the Bodhisattva's entire being, acting without thought of him or herself for the sake, not just of the righteous, but for the lost, the misled, the misleading, for horses, slugs, and worms, sparrows, eagles, and vultures, lambs and tigers, paramecium and spiders. Such action is second nature or first. How does the Bodhisattva actualize her great vow? How does the great vow use the Bodhisattva? How does he make real the commitment to save all beings? How can she see clearly when she has eyes all over? How to use so many eyes? A whale has an eye on each side of the head. How does a whale bring two visions together as one? A spider has 8 eyes, compounding the problem. But imagine having 22 eyes, 11 heads times 2, plus 1,000 more, an eye in each palm of each hand. How do you use all those eyes without confusion? And how do you adequately respond to all of what the many eyes see? How do you choose which arm to extend? Emails are coming daily requesting the Bodhisattva to sign this petition, attend this rally, donate to this or that campaign. Which should he do? She hardly has time to read the inspiring books piled up on her night table. How not end up paralyzed by indecision when ready and waiting in 1,000 arms are not just pillows, but ropes, hatchets, computers, iPads, cell phones, shovels, swords, fountain pens, crayons, chisels, life preservers, juice boxes, teapots, vitamins. How to skillfully use all those arms and eyes. How fulfill all the possibilities and options. The problem with kindness is that it's often dualistic. I will help you. Compassion arises from the more intimate ground of I am you. Because I'm not there, it can't be a big deal. Perhaps it's only something we notice after the fact. What? I did that? Once I was motorcycling along a country road and a deer bounded directly in front of me. My hand grabbed the front brake, my foot stomped on the rear one. Unfortunately, I had anti-lock brakes. My hand then immediately rolled on more throttle before I fell over from the sudden stop, and I rode on, having missed the deer by fractions of an inch. Hitting a deer on a motorcycle can kill you. But it all happened so fast, there was no time for even a single thought to arise, and so no fear. My heartbeat never even had a chance to speed up. Hands reached out, and then it was done. Afterward, I found that there had been something very freeing about it. 1,000 helping hands, a glimpse of something accessible to us all. As followers of the Buddha way, our aim is not to simply gain a bit of personal peace, but to actualize an ordinary life of practice, realization, whereas maturing human beings with jobs, families, and issues, we ourselves can begin to function less self-centeredly and so simultaneously more selflessly for family, friends, environment, nation, and the many beings. As lay Zen practitioners, we have opportunities every day to interact and extend or lend a hand, but not to impose one, which also means we have opportunities to integrate what we realize in the silence of Zazen into an actual life. This is the daily challenge and opportunity of lay Zen practice. The open eyes in the Bodhisattva's palms means that wisdom is not a matter of calculation, but of insight. To quote Leonard Cohen, a scheme is not a vision. That's from the story of Isaac. A scheme is not a vision. But how does the Bodhisattva of great compassion do it? How does she use all those hands and eyes? Well, how do we raise our hand, taste our food, think a thought, search for a memory, grab a ball, catch a ball, grab a brake lever? How do we cry when sad and laugh when happy? We are a hand reaching back for a pillow in the night. The eyes see, but does not see itself. The ear hears, but does not hear itself. This is our life. Seeing is responding if we don't suppress the activity that arises from selfless, unself-centered seeing. A kicked soccer ball heads for the street. We put out our foot and stop it before the neighborhood kids run out into traffic. Someone in front of us in line at the post office drops their wallet. We pick it up and hand it back. Yet how many times might we have balked, thinking, I see that this is important and I'll do it next time. Or think, it's just not convenient right now. Or fill in the blanks yourself. How easy it is to fall back into self-centered habits separating hands and eyes and hands. Returning to this breath, this count, this koan, eyes reopen, hands reach for pens and brushes, ropes and swords, pots and pans, cell phones and sitting cushions. Maturing is a lifetime's work. The Bodhisattva accomplishes great deeds, saves suffering beings, prevents untold agonies as naturally as if reaching back for a pillow in the night, and yet fails again and again. The hells refill. The effort of saving others is as fruitless and foolish as trying to fill a well with snow, which is a traditional Zen image for the path of the Bodhisattva. You pour the snow in, and it melts away. Why bother? And yet, is reaching back for a pillow in the night ultimately any different than tying a child's shoelace, heading to work, buying groceries, answering the phone? If it is, why and how? If not, why and how? Our life can be a series of opportunities for allowing the self to become porous, giving us a chance to mature, dropping concepts of inner self, external others. We no longer live like strangers to the earth, mere guests to time and planet. Practicing realization, practicing this breath, this count, this koan, the world steps in. An old teacher once asked his attendant, "What is that sound outside?" It was raining, and the attendant answered, "The sound of raindrops." The old teacher was hardly convinced. Not intimate, not by a long shot. How do we, express intimacy as life. Chao Chu, when asked, why did Bodhidharma come from the West? A traditional question in Zen, meaning what is the highest teaching of the Buddha Dharma, answered, the oak tree in the front garden. I have heard some views that this was a way of being illogical or stopping conceptual thought. I have heard such views, and I have to tell you, they totally miss the point. It is also not a way of saying that Bodhidharma came even for the sake of this humble tree over here, or that all beings are Buddha. None of that. Zhao Chu was intimate. But would his oak tree in the front garden alone have been enough to convince that other old teacher who'd asked about the sound outside? When the student answered the sound of raindrops, he wasn't convinced. What else might Zhao Chu have done? How do you see it? This all comes back to the core of the practice, zazen. Attending to the breath, the count, is dropping attention from the compulsively self-centered self. 1,000 eyes open, our own eyes, birds' eyes, bugs' eyes, the eyes of trees and clouds, dropping habitual self-centeredness by attending to the count, the breath, the koan. 1,000 hands flex and reach. We don't have to glue those many arms one by one like so many merit badges. Hold on one sec. Rather, seeing into and through the arising of this very self, we discover the 1,000 hands we already have always had. Zen Master Dogen in the Genjo Koan, actualizing the fundamental point section of the Shobogenzo, eye of the treasury of the true Dharma, lays it out clearly. To study the way is to study the self. To study the self is to forget the self. To forget the self is to drop concepts of one's own body and mind and others' bodies and minds as well. Dropping even traces of clinging to such habitual concepts is to be enlightened by all things. This traceless practice of enlightenment continues endlessly. To forget the self is not to suppress or ignore it. Zen practice asks us to look deeply into our deepest assumptions of what and who and where we are. What is this self? Where is it? If we keep at it, we begin to see that our sorrow is that we live in a dream turned nightmare, a comfort zone turned prison, believing ourselves utterly separate and alone, isolated. While provisionally so, this is ultimately delusive, as ongoing Zazen will confirm. This simple error causes endless suffering and remains the root cause of aggressive war, environmental destruction, racism, destructive nationalism, classism, misogyny, and our own personal shopping list of ills. All of it arising from the entrenched egotism that inevitably results from deeply felt separation, an inability to live intimately among stars, bugs, friends, parents, children, mountains, rivers on this great wide earth. Such intimacy is not simply to be wished for, but is, as ongoing Zen practice can confirm, our real condition, our birthright. If you doubt this is so, if you feel, no, I am separate, alone, why, that's good too. Use that doubt as motivation to find out for yourself and prove it one way or the other. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe the Buddha was wrong. Keep at it. Keep practicing. Find out for yourself what is true. Dropping self-centeredness opens a gateless gate and allows Avalokiteshvara, hearer of the cries of the world, with 1,000 wise hands to apply balm to wounds, pour water on deserts, tie up egotism, cut through self-centered habits. In the right circumstance, a rope, a sword, an anchor, a hammer might be as useful as a cup of tea or a kind word. Saving does not imply knocking on doors and handing out leaflets. Missionaries need not apply. How are all being saved right now? And how does such saving or freeing take place? After all, this is the first vow of Bodhisattvas, to save the many beings. An introductory koan puts us to the test and asks us to save a ghost. Save a ghost. How does a great bodhisattva manage it? How does she know how to use all those hands and eyes? To repeat, Dogen says, to study the way or practice the way is to study the self. To study the self is to forget the self. To forget the self also means we stop putting the demands of our own self-centeredness onto everyone else, which frees others from us. Releases birds to the air, bugs to the soil, flowers to the spring. Freeing ourselves frees all. It sounds narcissistic, immense, overblown. But actually it comes down to simple things. Counting this breath. 1, 2, 3. Experiencing this breath. Questioning completely who is hearing. Absorption in a single koan point. By practicing, we find we are dropping the self, forgetting the self, and that the world steps in. Or rather, this worm on the sidewalk, this falling leaf, this morning star step in, and because they do, we begin to step from our dream of isolation to live in a real world. Or if you want, don't forget the self. Hold to it tight as you can. See if it is as solid as you believe. Try to find it. Search and search. What do you find? Birdsong, pain in knees, itchy nose, endless thoughts, feelings, sensations, sound, sight, taste, touch, smells. Is there anything more? Is there nothing more? Where is myself? Are these so many hands and eyes? Is all there is hands and eyes? How does the Bodhisattva use hands and eyes? Master Dogen turned that around and asked, how do hands and eyes use all those Bodhisattvas? When Jnan said, I understand, or I get it, was he saying, sure, I understand, or was he saying, now I get it? But what is there to get? If we are whole and complete from the start, as the Buddha proclaimed upon his great enlightenment, wonder of wonders, all beings are Buddha, how much more whole and complete can we become? Yet if we are whole and complete, why don't we know it? And why must we work so hard to wake to it? That was the question that gave young Dogen no peace. In time, of course, his no peace opened the way to great peace. What is the relation of seeing to doing, insight to action, zazen to our complex and demanding lives? Is our aim to be calm and quiet, or is that just the beginning of being able to do what? It's like reaching back for a pillow in the night, says Tao Wu. That sounds easy, but is it? And what night is meant? What is the darkness? Is it a simple antithesis of daylight? Is it a bad thing? And doesn't real seeing and doing demand full attention? How can a sleepy, half awake, half asleep condition, neither one nor the other, be of any use reaching back for your pillow in the night? And what about those two answers? Hands and eyes all over the body, hands and eyes throughout the body. Which one is better? Is one better? Which is more accurate, more true? And is there a point? Or are those two old worthies just being clever? And if that's all it is, who cares? And what about those 8/10? Is 80% good enough? Or is it another failure? Zen Master Dogen, commenting on this koan, says that if real criticism were implied, Tao Wu wouldn't have said, you answer well, but it's 8/10. Instead, he'd have said, that's 8/10, or that's 80%. Why is that? What's he getting at? If we're not lost in our heads, going over the ache of unhealed wounds, planning new and more successful repartee, working on self-centered schemes, then, when our friend slips, our hand reaches out to steady her. If the ball is overthrown, we catch it and throw it back. Without a thought, nothing special, nothing to take special note of. The phone rings and we pick it up and say, hello, this is life. The so-called point of practice. To live less here, that is, with less of our conditioned, habitual, unconscious self-centeredness in the driver's seat, we are more here, more present than ever, and can then do more appropriately, and then can more appropriately do or not do as the situation requires. Could a Buddha do more? Great vows mature in the complex, frustrating, imperfect mix of an ordinary life. Yamada Roshi says that the point of practice is the maturing of character, which doesn't happen by willing ourselves into more mature versions of ourselves. It happens by losing ourselves. That is, by losing sight of the self-consciousness that stands like a veil, or sometimes a wall, between us and everything, even things and people we hold dear. Dropping the whole self-centered deal by focusing so fully on this moment of practice, not thinking about practice, but practicing, the isolated concept of an interior self fades or falls away. In that instant, we touch base with the essential nature of all natures, human and non-human, the no nature at all, which is the key to our own missing humanity. Starting to see and act from a less self-centered center is our path of maturing. But it is not straightforward, 7 times down, 8 times up. Such is life, is how an old Japanese folk saying puts it. The practice of getting to the top of the mountain of Zen, we're told, isn't all that difficult. You work at it, and in time, something. But when you start back down, that's when you discover that descending is endless. How does the Bodhisattva use all those hands and eyes? Is never ending. Stay with the practice. Stay with the breath. Don't wander. Stay with the koan. When the Bodhisattva wakes, you'll hand over the pillow yourself. Ripeness is all, to quote the bard. We'll stop here and recite our great vows for all. And I'll turn this around and I'll stop the recording. I'll turn this around so we can look at the Buddha on the altar and the Bodhisattvas at the front of the room.